Senator, thanks very much for your time today. I know you've had to stand by a lot of news conferences happening at the moment. Obviously, Victoria, pretty hard hit now. This must be hard to watch. You're no stranger to fire in your part of the world, the Otway Ranges in Victoria.
Yeah, it's devastating, Tom. I mean, people are grieving for the loss of loved ones, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers who have been killed in these tragic fires, people homeless, loss of livestock, countless animals killed, millions, some species pushed to the brink of extinction. It's a social, economic, environmental catastrophe. And of course, the great tragedy, Tom, is that we were warned, the Prime Minister was warned. He had the fire chiefs begging to meet with him to advise him of the summer that was to come. He ignored them. Instead, he chose to disappear in the middle of the fires. His office lied about it. He came back. He's continued to minimise and downplay these fires. He told us to focus on the cricket, not on what was unfolding in almost every state in the country. It's a tragic failure of leadership. And of course, we know sitting underneath these unprecedented fires is the issue of dangerous climate change. We've got a Prime Minister who continues to lobby for the coal industry. We know that coal is the single biggest cause of climate change. We know that these fires are fuelled by climate change. We need to learn the lessons from this time. Obviously, in the immediate response, we have to do everything we can. But we need a national response, not one that leaves it up to each state to go it alone. We need to make sure we've got a better approach to land management, and of course, most importantly, we've got to have strong action on climate change. That means not one more new coal mine built in Australia.
I want to get to the other aspects in a moment, but on land management, because you live on the land,
yes.
In a practical sense, what do you think can be done? What are some of the lessons emerging out of this particular fire threat in terms of the fighting and the short-term prevention measures?
Well, everybody supports hazard reduction burning. There's not a politician in the parliament that doesn't support hazard reduction burning as a tool to try and reduce the risk to property and life. The challenge is that because our bushfire season is now starting earlier and finishing later, that what we have is a very narrow window in which to do it safely. Look, we need a Royal Commission into these fires so that we can look at how we improve our land management practices. That has to be resourced, and one of the concerns we've got is it hasn't been resourced appropriately. But if the government's not prepared to have a comprehensive Royal Commission so we can learn what needs to be done when it comes to land management and indeed emergency response and climate change, then we'll push for a parliamentary commission of inquiry when we return to the parliament. We have to learn the lessons of this. This is not something that's going to help in the immediate response, but certainly something we have to learn from if we're going to make sure, as we heard from Ken Lane in your recent press conference, this is the new normal. These fires are unprecedented, but they will be with us into the future, and we cannot respond in the ad hoc way that we've seen from this Prime Minister.
So the lessons as well, in terms of those elements of hazard reduction, does everything go on the table there, including approaches as to whether you're prioritising sometimes threatened species and habitats, or saying we can't afford this large tract of land to be totally unburnt? When you're talking as well about individual properties, I know in Queensland in particular, farmers complain about not being able to chop down trees on their properties when they're relatively close to the homestead themselves. All these things, you're happy for all of them to be on the table?
Look, it's got to be a discussion based on science and informed by the experts, Tom, but let's not get sort of sucked into what is a ploy from the Prime Minister and his climate deniers in the government, that what's going on here is because of a failure of hazard reduction burning.
I just wanted to assess the different elements of it. I'm going to go into climate in a moment, but I'm just ascertaining all those sort of elements. Previous approaches where we might have said, hey, this species is important, we need to keep it, that we sort of even need to be brutal and reassess some of those elements, perhaps.
Obviously, it's a discussion based on science, on expertise. We hear from fire experts. But the bottom line, Tom, is that we were warned about this many months ago by fire chiefs, and the Prime Minister effectively gave them the middle finger and said, I'm not meeting with you. He was derelict in his responsibility to keep the country safe and tried to fob this off onto the states. This isn't a state issue, this is a national crisis. We have we have the Navy rolling into the Australian coastline to evacuate people. We have people who are effectively now climate refugees who are being evacuated from the Australian coastline.
It is a state issue initially in terms of the response. Of course, the federal government can react. Does it beg the question as to why?
Well, we've got the ADF involved, Tom. Tom, the ADF's involved, and then what we've got is we've got the Prime Minister deploying reservists, and the authorities don't even know that that's happening. This is a mess, and it's a catastrophic mess because it has resulted in an increased risk to the lives of Australians, to the loss of property, and to the ecological catastrophe that's unfolding. And much of it...
Sorry, so just from that, the increased loss to risk of life of Australians, are you saying the inaction from the federal government has cost lives?
I'm saying the inaction from this Prime Minister has put the lives of Australians at risk, absolutely, by ignoring the advice of our fire chiefs and fire experts. Are you putting that down to
the government?
Well, we're going to have a Royal Commission, and people need to be held to account for the decisions that they have made. And if the government's not prepared to go with the Royal Commission, we'll move for a parliamentary commission of inquiry with Royal Commission-like powers so that we never make these mistakes again and we hold people to account for the decisions that they have made.
You've tweeted today, Richard Di Natale, that Scott Morrison is unfit for office. You cited the climate crisis amongst that. He did take to an election his climate policy only 8 months ago, and the voters said, yes, you can have office with those policies. That's worth pointing out, isn't it?
Well, the reality is that this is a Prime Minister who runs a government that is dominated by climate deniers, and their climate denialism has resulted in Australia facing this catastrophic threat. I mean, he brought a lump of coal into the parliament, waved it around as though it was some big joke, when we know that the mining of coal is the single biggest cause of climate change. He's proposing to go to India. I mean, I note that he's cancelled or at least delayed that trip to India to go and spruik for one of the world's biggest coal mines. Now, if this isn't a wake-up call to Scott Morrison and the climate deniers in his government, then we need to do everything that we can as a parliament to hold him and his climate-denying government to account. The reality is...
The Greens obviously trying to... Just want to ask you this. The Greens are trying to get Australia to reduce emissions further, obviously, and you've said only last month that you've reached out to Labor. Is that in the spirit of genuine compromise on the Greens side?
Absolutely. Look, Tom, our policies are well known. We want a plan to phase out coal. We want to do it rapidly. We want targets based on science. But right now we've got a government that refuses to act, indeed worse than that, parades itself on the international stage and undermines global action. On one hand they say we can't do it alone, and then they head off overseas and undermine global action. This is a government that needs to be held to account. You know, I wasn't a fan of John Howard, but in the Port Arthur gun massacre, he rose to the challenge. What he said was, this is something that needs immediate action. We had a cross-party response. We had strong gun control laws implemented. He took on people on his own side at some political cost, and we emerged with laws that help keep people safe. Scott Morrison could do the same, and in a crisis, that's what a leader does. Instead, this bloke has been stubborn, he's been patronising, he's been telling people in regional Australia, look, relax, this is what happens in Australia. Well, this is not what happens in Australia. This is unprecedented. In Australia, we don't have the Navy rolling into Australian territory to evacuate Australians who have spent a night on a beach fleeing from fire.
Okay.
That's not what should happen in a country like Australia.
I just want to get as well to that compromise you mentioned, though, with Labor. So you've got a zero emissions policy by 2040. Is that something you'd budge on at all if Labor said maybe we can make it 2045 and you map out the path on how you get there?
Tom, we are always going to be in a position where we'll advocate for the right policy, but we will accept a step in the right direction. But at the moment, we're not even seeing that. We've got the Prime Minister saying we're going to meet and beat our targets based on dodgy accounting, based on a dodgy accounting trick. I mean, the bottom line is pollution in Australia is going up. The only time in Australia where we managed to put a lid on pollution and actually drive pollution down was when we had the world's best carbon tax. We brought down pollution And the climate deniers in the Liberal Party
It wasn't one that lasted,
down.
though, and you talk about a step in the right direction. Many would have argued that was going to be the CPRS, which the Greens blocked. Do you think you're perhaps going to be one more willing to compromise than the Greens were at that time?
Look, I have always said that we will ensure that if there's a step we can take in the right direction, that's what we'll do. But we're not even having that conversation. The Prime Minister tries to put this off.
Well, the government isn't right now, but I'm just trying to cast forward to the previous times that the Greens have been involved in this policy. It's with Labor and it's in the Senate.
We work cooperatively with the Labor Party, and we introduced the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, still funding tens of billions of dollars in renewable energy. We introduced the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, which has funded a range of new innovative renewable energy projects. We will, of course, work with anybody if it means getting action on climate change. But right now the Prime Minister denies that it's even a contributor to the problem and that he has agency over this. The Prime Minister could pick up the phone to Anthony Albanese, to myself, to other crossbench MPs and say, we're going to take action on climate change. Let's get in a room and nut out some policies to do it. Instead, we've got him blaming people within the Greens for something that's based on a lie. We've got him out there absolving himself of his responsibility as our national leader to ensure that he shows leadership through what is a national crisis. He refuses to meet with the fire chiefs.
Okay.
This guy has shown himself to be unfit for office.
We are right out of time. Greens leader Richard Di Natale, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Tom.